Back in the showroom for this week. Well, only for now. We might go back into it later. How are we tonight, guys? We have lights. And we have all kinds of other stuff. Why is that light blinking like that? Screw it. Whatever. I ain't got time for all that. Hey, check out the lights in the room. You can actually see me. Nice blue-ish thing. I got some good spotlights. You know, anybody else deserves it. Of course it is moi. Of course it's me. So everybody, how are we doing tonight? We have some good stuff to happen. Boy, that sounded retarded, didn't it? Well, here's what I got for you. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the dive. I'm your illustrious host. You should know my name. It's in the logo. They should know the name. It's in the logo, right? I mean, of course. All right. And as always, I want to thank each and every one of you for spending your evening with me. All right. That's enough smoozing. Okay. Whether you're watching live or catching the replay, I appreciate your support. Before we jump into tonight's movie, there's something I like to talk about. If you followed this channel for any length of time, you know that I genuinely love movies. I love talking about them, breaking them down, sharing trivia stuff, and introducing them to people, giving away things who may have never seen them before to those people. That's what the show has always been about, period. Unfortunately, creating movie content today isn't always easy. Okay? As a matter of fact, it is a royal pain in the ass most of the time. Recently, we premiered No Holds Barred with Charles and Rick, and during the show, we used a WWE clip that lasted only about 2 seconds. Despite how brief it was, the video was blocked on YouTube. The whole thing. Now, I'm not bringing that up because I'm looking for sympathy. I'm bringing it up because it's part of being a content creator. I respect copyright. I believe artists, filmmakers, musicians, and companies deserve to protect their work. They invest countless hours, enormous amounts of money, and incredible talent into creating the entertainment we all enjoy. But at the same time, I also believe there's a tremendous value in reviewing, discussing, and celebrating those films. That's what channels like this are built on. That's why I decided to do this in the first place. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes the system works. Either way, I'm not going to spend my life fighting platforms. But something tells me I'm going to be spending quite a bit of time fighting platforms. If one door closes, hell, I'll find another. Okay? That's just how that fucking shit works. Serial killers do it. Murderers do it, right? One window's closed, they go to another one. I mean, shoot, why should I be any different than a serial killer? So there are far more important things in my life than arguing with algorithms. So my priorities have always been simple. First, my wife. She will always come before anything else. Second, my career, which is my job out there in the field. That comes second. If this were to interfere with that, I wouldn't do it. But, that career always allows me to provide for my wife and makes everything you see here possible. Okay? And third, this community, all of you, because without you, there is no dive. But of course, it's my genius that keeps it going. But, we'll talk about that some other time. So no, I'm not angry. I'm not discouraged. I am quietly pissed off. You can tell, can't you? But I'm certainly not going to quit. I'll adapt, I'll improve, and I'll keep doing what I've always done. Talking about movies. I love with people who love movies. So I've said my piece. Oh, and also I do interviews, but I loathe most interviews because if they don't come on, you have to go to plan B. So, you know, my advice to you, if you ever have a guest on your show, have a plan B. Now, I've said my piece. So I've said it. Now let's get to why we're all here. Tonight, we're returning to the halls of Ewan High School as we take a deep dive into the 2013 adaptation of Carrie. Okay? Last week, we revisited the film that introduced audiences to Carrie White and changed horror forever. It really did. Tonight, we're looking at a new interpretation of that same story, one made nearly 4 decades later for a new generation. So that's just how that works. I'm not a big fan of redos, even though there is some, every once in a while you come across a decent one. So understand all that and we'll be good to go with it. So we're not here tonight to compare it to the 1976 classic. Well, I'd say compare it. Well, I guess you could say compare it. That's what we're going to do. At the end of the show, I'm going to tell you what the score is. Now, Carrie 76 got a 9.8. That's a high score. But guess what? Carrie 2013 has to make a 9.9 or a 9.8.1 to break even. But we're going to see if that's possible. It might be possible. So I'm asking you, does Carrie 2013 succeed as a film in its own right? We'll explore the story, the performances, the direction, the themes, the production. And at the end of the night, I'll reveal my official Fearless score. Yay. So let us begin. Okay? Bottom line, you remake a classic, it ain't easy. Nearly 40 years later, filmmakers, they face different challenges, but at the same time, they remake anything that fucking ain't tied down. But the one thing that some people do is they ask the question, how do you stay faithful to the book and how do you stay faithful to the film? As I've said before, a book is a 20-hour experience, a movie is a 2-hour experience, roughly. Something's got to give. Something's got to get cut out. So you look at what the original cut out and you include that in the 2013 version. To me, I was not a huge fan of the 76. You notice that Carrie was killing people by spraying them with a water hose. I'm sure the water hose hurt, but I saw one actress get sprayed with water hose and then she fell dead. Not totally in that. But then again, she also locked the doors at the end with her psychic powers and they all burned to death. So off screen, so I give that to him. Give that to him. But you got to ask yourself this. Do you create something entirely on your own? Those are the questions hanging over every frame of the 2013 version. So Kimberly Pierce, who's the director, updated Stephen King's story, for the digital age. Where humiliation could spread around the world with a single tap of a smartphone. But beneath the modern setting lies the same timeless story of bullying, isolation, religious fanaticism, and of course, the devastating consequences of cruelty. We all went to school. We all know how people are, how do I put this nicely? Assholes. And the bottom line is you had bullies, but you also had the seriously demented type of bully. You ever had that type of, I was never bullied in school, so I honestly don't know a whole lot about it, but I've been teased a little bit. And of course, teasing is easy to get rid of. It's just like a balloon. Pop the balloon. You don't have to worry about it no more. So that's pretty much what I did a couple of times. That's just kind of how that works. I don't condone. Actually, you know what? I condone violence. I condone it a lot. Especially, let me tell you something. If a person is being bullied, don't worry about the guns and shit. What you need to do is you need to basically say, hey, kick his fucking kneecap in, drop like a fucking rock. That's what you need to do. I encourage that. Okay? We all encourage those things because people bullying, it's hard to believe bullying even takes place now. Why is bullying even a thing now? But it still is. And you'll see in this movie that Carrie was not only being bullied, she had a fantastic gift that she was trying to use, and then boom. Why How come every time I try to make a point, I can't snap really good?
There you go.
No, 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 no. That's not.
Oh.
Whatever. Anyway, bottom line is we'll find out whether this remake stands on its own or simply lives in the shadow of the original. Let's take the dive, ladies and gentlemen, and let's go into our feature presentation. All right. So, are we ready to show this movie? Yeah, goddamn right we are. Okay. Now, I pressed the wrong button. And see, it's a great thing about wearing sunglasses because you can barely see a goddamn thing. But it's cool, right? Here we go. Ooh, yes, 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 sir. That's definitely one for it, I tell you. See, the definitely thing about that is it had a lot going for it, and the ending was a little bit more different. Instead of coming out of the ground, it came out of her. So I actually thought that was actually pretty good. So, what do we got? Okay, that pretty much sums it up. We got it right there. So, what are we going to do now? Well, I tell you what we're going to do. We watched it, and from beginning to end, it's time to break it down. Break it down. And just like we did last week, that start at the beginning. One thing I appreciate about this version is that it wastes no time establishing the tone. You know, it really doesn't. Instead of opening with the dreamy, almost surreal atmosphere of the 76 film, this adaptation begins with something much more intense. Carrie being born. It's a powerful sort of introduction that immediately shows us just how unstable Margaret White is, and how Carrie's been raised in an environment, where it was dominated by fear and religious extremism. From there we move to the locker room. The scene follows the same basic thing as Stephen King's novel, but it's updated a little bit. Bullying doesn't end inside the school; it follows Carrie out onto the internet, which has, if you watch Dateline or any of the stuff on television, a lot of kids get bullied online. And you could tell them, hey, look, just don't go online. And it's almost like amputating a piece of their body. Internet's ingrained in them from birth, basically. So the incident was recorded, what happened to her. Her mother never told her what girls go through. I don't see why she didn't. So it can follow someone home. It can be shared endlessly. That change makes the story feel frighteningly believable. All that. Chloe Grace Moretz gives a Carrie who's shy, socially awkward, and emotionally sheltered. Just emotionally sheltered. So this version overall is a little bit more confident than the Carrie we saw in 76, but you could still feel the loneliness, beneath the surface. Once we return home, we're reminded that school isn't Carrie's only battle. Margaret Wright controls every aspect of her life. The house feels isolated. The walls are filled with religious, imagery. Every conversation is driven. Every conversation is basically driven by fear, guilt, and punishment. Julianne Moore approaches Margaret differently than Piper Laurie did. Her performance feels quieter, less theatrical, but like I pointed out, but no less disturbing. She portrays a woman whose, obsession has completely consumed her. Story unfolds, Carrie begins discovering what power she has. And unlike the first film, unlike the 76 version, she spends more time showing Carrie, we show it experimenting with her powers. She researches telekinesis, practices, even controls it just basically, which kind of, I like that a little bit more. You see Carrie sort of dip into it a little bit in the 76, and then at the end, she just flat out, does it. That's a strike against the 76 version. So by the end of the first act, every major piece is in place. Carrie's searching for confidence. Sue is struggling with guilt. Chris is consumed by anger. And Margaret tightens her grip, basically. The audience knows that all these paths are sort of leading toward one unforgettable night. We're all waiting for that night. In 76, not everybody probably read the book. So we didn't know what was going to happen at the end. Or, more or less. So the foundation has been laid. The story begins to build. And sort of that, begins, and sort of how, incendiary. And I know everybody wants to think, hey, what's going to happen next? And it kind of gives you that, all the characters are their age. They're not old characters. 20. You don't have a 30-year-old woman playing Carrie, even though Sissy Spacek did a great job. I'm just saying, it takes us all back to high school. Takes us all back to those days when we knew what it was. I think Chloe did a great job. She had an incredibly difficult task. Leading up to all that, she wasn't simply playing, Carrie. She was stepping into a role that was associated with Sissy Spacek. That's a challenge for anybody, basically, following in their footsteps. Rather than imitate the original performance, she created her own interpretation. Carrie's intelligent, curious, sensitive. She desperately wants to fit in. Like I pointed out, she's beginning to discover that she's stronger than everyone ever believed it. She was very confident. It's a different portrayal, but one that, fits the direction the film was taking. Julianne Moore did a good job as Margaret. Her version is deeply unsettling. She wasn't kind of laughing and giggling a little bit. So that calmness, can make her even more unpredictable. Because, exactly when she's going to snap. She wants to hurt herself to get attention. And, that's sort of, it wasn't a simple imitation of what Piper Laurie did. Both of them did a great job in the end. Sue Snell, Gabriel Wilde, who played Sue Snell, Sue becomes like the story's, conscious. She recognizes the cruelty shown toward, Carrie and genuinely wants to make amends. Her sincerity gives the film an emotional anchor. Portia Doubleday's Chris Hargensen is, aggressive, manipulative, relentless. She's driven by humiliation. She was humiliated by the teacher in front of everybody. And that anger, basically fuels every decision, even though answering to a boy who is a really bad influence on her. Ansel Elgort's Tommy Ross, I liked him. He wasn't a dish rag like the other one. He's kind-hearted, believable. He treats Carrie with respect in the film's warmest moments before everything falls apart. Ooh, that snap was good. Judy Greer was in this. A lot of people might remember her from 30 Going on 30, Modern Family. Did one of her best performances. She brings compassion and authority to Miss Desjardins. Am I saying that right? I think I'm saying that right. But she wants to protect her, but like every adult in the story, she's ultimately unable to stop what's coming. We all know what's coming. We look at the water, we see it rise, And, here it comes. You can't stop it. The cast as a whole, it's everyone commits fully to their roles. No one's trying to recreate the original. I kind of got that from this, didn't you? They weren't trying to recreate it. So I'm not a big fan of recreations. This kind of took the story and updated it a little bit. So I didn't feel like this movie was a carbon copy of the original. So that's pretty good. Um, Viewers prefer these portrayals, is something we'll save for another discussion. Tonight we're judging these performances. Well, I say we, I mean me, on their own merits. So I think this cast gives us a believable, emotional, grounded interpretation of Stephen King's characters. That's a mouthful, isn't it? So we basically looked at how the story happens. We got the prom, the betrayal, and the destruction that's coming, and how this modern adaptation handles that. So let's go into that part of the story. Every version of Carrie lives or dies by one sequence: prom night. Prom night is what? Everybody's special night. Basically, when prom's over, everybody goes and talks to Jesus after that, because there's no telling. It happens bad to some people. But everything, it's supposed to be a magical night, more for the girls and the boys. But everything we've watched up to this point in the movie has been sort of building toward that single moment. Just like the original story, Carrie finally experiences something she's never truly had before: acceptance. And I pointed that out quite a bit. She arrives at the prom looking confident, not because she's become someone else, but because for the first time she believes she belongs. And Chloe does a nice job showing that gradual transformation. You can actually see Carrie, her walls beginning to come down. She's not as guarded as she was. She smiles, dances, laughs, enjoys herself for one brief evening. And she gets to be a normal teenager. And I think Chloe was around 16 or 17 when this movie came out. So that was a good age, basically, to have somebody in that part. That makes what happens next even more heartbreaking. Chris and Billy's plan unfolds much like everybody expects. The bucket is positioned with the blood. The timing is set. Every step moves us closer, and we see it. We know it's coming. We know it's coming. Even if you've seen the original or read Stephen King's novel, there's still a sense of anticipation because you know what's happening. Then, boom, the moment arrives. The blood falls. Carrie's frozen, humiliated, shocked, broken, and in an instant, everything changes. That coronation, that nice coronation, that dance is shattered. One thing this version does differently is how it portrays Carrie's powers once they're unleashed. The destruction is much larger in scale. Her telekinesis is more controlled, more deliberate. Instead of simply reacting to panic, Carrie actively uses her abilities throughout the sequence. Special effects allow the filmmakers to present telekinesis in ways that simply weren't possible decades earlier. Cars move, objects fly, entire sections of the building collapse. The visual scope is impressive. And after escaping the prom, Carrie returns home, believing the nightmare has finally ended. Instead, she faces the one person who shaped everything in her life more than anyone else: her mother, Margaret White. And this confirmation becomes less about supernatural powers and more about years of emotional abuse. Julianne Moore and Chloe Moritz, they carry this scene with great intensity. You can feel the pain, the anger, the fear, and the tragedy. But as horror fans know, the story always leaves us with one final reminder that Carrie White's legacy isn't so easily forgotten. The film closes with Sue Snell trying to move forward after the events she survived. Whether you've read the novel, seen the original or experienced the remake first, it's still a haunting conclusion. So I believe it's well made, but why was it made? Why remake something that so many people have already care about and love? In the case of this one, the goal wasn't to replace it, it was to reintroduce Stephen King's story to a new generation. You know, the director, Kimberly, she approached the material by learning and leaning in more heavily into King's novel while updating it. Social media, cell phones, online humiliation. These aren't small additions. It hasn't disappeared in many ways. It's become even more public. So critically, the movie received mixed reviews. Some praised it, some didn't. Others felt it stayed too close to previous versions without carving out a completely unique identity. And financially, however, the film performed respectably. I think it made $100 million off of a modestly lower budget. Um, that's part of the film's legacy. Whether they love it or like it or appreciate it, keep Stephen King's story alive a little bit longer, and that's something worth recognizing. So here we go. Basically, this is what we got. The director, she did a good job with the themes, isolation, and the identity. Chloe Moretz worked to portray Carrie as more socially isolated, intellectually naive, and creating a different interpretation from previous versions. Julianne Moore intentionally avoided Pipe Laurie's original performance and carved out her own niche, which actually worked really well. Many of the telekinetic effects relied more on practical wire work and digital. I know there was a little bit of CGI in there. Locker room bullying was updated to include, all the modern stuff. And Stephen King's novel was first adapted in the 70s, so you didn't have a lot of that stuff. Actually, you didn't have any of it. Although comparing to the 76 film was basically unavoidable, the filmmakers consistently stated they wanted to honor Stephen King's original novel rather than simply remake Brian De Palma's film. And I can agree with that. Those production choices help explain why this version often feels familiar while still trying to tell the story. Now, I respect this remake and what it set out to do. It wasn't trying to be a carbon copy. They make these characters their own. Visually, the movie looks excellent. The production design is strong. The cinematography is polished. However, if I have one criticism, is that the film occasionally plays things a little too, safely. It doesn't go out on the ragged edge and the raw edge that the original one did. Honors a story and respects the novel, but it respects it and honors it so much that it didn't want to go off on its own. There were moments where I wanted to take a few more creative risks and surprise the audience. That would have been cool. Even so, this is a solid adaptation. It's emotionally engaging, well acted. Photography is good and absolutely worth watching. So, on its own. So, what's the score I give it? Here we go, babe. The story, 9 out of 10. Faithful retelling. Characters, 9 out of 10. We're doing the nines. Strong performances, 9.5 acting. Chloe Moretz and Julianne Moore were excellent. I actually liked their performances. Chloe was doing playing a very good innocent girl. Julianne Moore, I liked her performance a little bit more, even though I did like Piper Laurie's was kind of, just psycho-religious bullshit. But she was very like, man, I just don't want to be around people. You see the part where she stabbed herself with the pick? Ooh, because she doesn't want to be around people. So, but yet she takes a job where she's around people. You gotta love that. Acting, 9.5 out of 10. Julianne Moore and her did do a good job in it, like I said before. Direction, 9 out of 10. Kimberly Pierce delivers a polished, respectful adaptation. Music, I go with 8 out of 10. A lot of good atmospheric without overshadowing the story Horror, 9 out of 10. Emotional horror remains the strength, supported by modern visual effects. Entertainment, 9 out of 10. Rewatch value, 8 out of 10. Legacy, 8.5 out of 10. So my score for Carrie 2013 is, drum roll please, 9 out of 10. Respectful, it was well crafted, modern adaptation that succeeds on its own terms. So, well, we've reviewed both, and we pretty much know who won. But we are going to go through this each category, and it won't take too long. Story, the winner, Carrie 76, Carrie White. Winner, Chloe Moritz 2013. Margaret White, winner, Piper Laurie. Supporting cast, winner, Carrie 76. Faithfulness to Stephen King. Novel, 2013, Carrie. Special effects, 2013. Music, 76. Emotional impact, 76. Legacy, well, let me go back to the emotional impact. I'll give that a tie. I'll tie that with both of them. Legacy is 76. So that's just kind of how it is. So the final score speaks for itself, guys. Carrie 76 wins, I believe wins about 6 categories to 2, and there was a tie. So that doesn't mean Carrie 2013 isn't worth watching. It's solid. But if you're asking me which version best captures the heart of Stephen King's story, for somebody who's read Stephen King's books, the answer is the original. It's Brian De Palma's just going to hold that. But the great thing I like about this is 2013 didn't try to take over. It was his own movie. So Carrie 76 is crowned the winner. So congratulations to the original for, defending it. So definitely we'll say this, guys. That wraps up tonight's episode. If you enjoyed the show, let me know your winner if you have one, even though my winner is more important. Did you agree with my decision, or would you have given the crown to 13? I'd like to hear your thoughts. But we have run out of time, and feel free to let me know. Until next time, thank you for watching. Okay, this is me. Good night.